A viewer asked if I would talk about where my studio is in New York City. And I won't divulge that address, but I can tell you it's not far from the Flower District in the 20s, which is a pleasure to walk through every morning from the subway to my workspace. If you want to learn about color, go look at tulips, and that's where all the people sell flowers for the restaurants and the hotels in the city. There are a lot of great Indian restaurants around here. I love Indian food. And I'm only a few blocks from the Museum of Sex. I'm not kidding. I've not been there. I've heard it's terrific. However, one of these times I'm going to go in there and I want to ask them if their openings are big. And then I'll report back to you how that goes for me. I want to talk a little bit about the notion of top and bottom in a painting. And it sounds obvious, of course, there's a top and a bottom to a composition. But sometimes the most innocuous things that the viewer may overlook, you and I know as painters have to be very carefully considered and very rigorously orchestrated in a coherent composition. Does the top of the painting correspond to the area around our heads? And likewise, does the bottom refer to the area around our feet? Leo Steinberg writes about this eloquently in his essay, The Flatbed Picture Plane. We experience the world in a vertical orientation against the horizontal landscape. So is the space in the painting an extension of that orientation? Are we included in that perceptual envelope in the same way we experience the world outside? It's an interesting premise to me. And when I'm composing a painting, I'll often start at the top, and then I'll put each successive plane on slightly over the previous one, like steps, so that by the time I get to the bottom plane tends to be the thickest and the closest to the viewer, giving the impression of stacked space going back. And if I want to suggest something more stressful or more disquieting, I'll reverse that. I'll put a lot of emphasis and a lot of weight on the top plane. Similar to this Marsden Hartley, in which he places a lot of scale and sculptural presence on the clouds. The hierarchy seems to be shifted to the sky, which is nothing new, but it's a little bit disquieting in this painting because you get the feeling that the sky is about to tip on top of your head. It's about to fall top heavily on you, which gives the impression of movement and of anxiety and unpredictability and the possibility of dangerous movement. And danger is always an interesting adjective in a painting. I'm very invested in the physical properties of painting. And when it drips and coagulates and runs down, that's part of composing to me. I like letting paint do what it does, that it's submissive to the same properties of gravity that we are on the ground, on Earth, pulling in a downward direction. And it's not a question of representation versus abstraction. I could name a painter like Stanton MacDonald Wright, for instance, and there very much is the feeling of a top and a bottom, even though they are very highly abstracted compositions. Morris Louis, Willem de Kooning, another good example. Even in the most abstracted de Koonings, there is a top and a bottom, which very much puts those painters in the realm of nature painting. That there is a relationship between the interior world and the exterior world. Between the skin of that and the skin of this, the skin of the viewer in front of it. And all of these relationships take on more ambiguity when you consider someone like Agnes Martin, who presents it in a much more reductive, with less color, with harder edges, in a more diagrammatic language, but still redolent of nature and the organization of thought and emotion in relation to nature. I love Agnes Martin. And nobody owned the picture plane with the language of vertical and horizontal quite like she did. And when I'm composing a painting in that language, she's always right there over my shoulder. Agnes Martin. This is a fabulous example of the notion of top and bottom in a painting, and also foreground, background. It's called the Brittany Pardon by Pascal Dagnon Bouveret, 1886, a French academic painter. It's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York, and has been one of my favorite paintings for about 25 years. It's a resplendent example of spatial organization with that kind of stacking and meandering figures moving from the bottom into the top part of the picture, or the middle top part of the picture, suggesting space and the continuation of space beyond the picture plane into our space, with the most resolute and highly contrasted figures being in the foreground, and then gradually being affected tonally as they move into the background. The contrast is less. Everything is bathed in a kind of cohesive light, which is really driven by a combination of purple and gray-green, which kind of permeates everything and gives it that French naturalist envelope of light, which is so beautiful. And the feet of the gentleman on the cane, the way they connect to the ground, these are the things that keep me awake at night. Just like mixing some color, we have a cerulean blue and cadmium yellow medium to come up with a green. Somewhat dull green. And then I'm going to take a little bit of Diox purple, hit it with some white. And then start to introduce the green into that. And get some of that neutral color that we saw in the Bouveret. Slightly grayish, slightly greenish, slightly purple. And then it's just, when you introduce something like cadmium orange into it, it's just magic. The nuances you can get. Slightly warmed there. So often what I'll do is I'll take one or two colors, and those colors will essentially be in the DNA of every other color in the painting. And it creates essentially a unity through color throughout the painting, which ties it together and keeps the light working in the painting. Another compositional principle I often use is called the rule of thirds. And to illustrate it, I'm going to show you a painting in my book. That's the painting. And then what we'll do is put up an image of the same painting with the rule of thirds applied. And you can see that the image is just divided vertically into thirds and then horizontally into thirds, with the intersections of those lines creating areas of visual interest and a little bit higher energy than had it been divided symmetrically. You can see in this painting, the top right intersection is an area where the space tends to collapse in an accordion-like effect, which pulls the viewer in, which creates kind of a climax or a detonation point of the composition. And I've talked about this in one of these previous episodes, the notion of compositional climax. I think it was Sir Joshua Reynolds who coined the term rule of thirds. And it is a way to create, again, a system of hierarchies in terms of visual interest, a place for the viewer to look first in the composition and then maybe move out into other areas of the painting, and a way to create rhythm. And rhythm is very important to me in my paintings, and I spent many, many years prior to, during, and after college as a drummer, as a serious drummer, and I was really good. I played in jazz and rock bands and also in pro musica consorts. We toured the southern states with a madrigal choir, and I was the percussionist, and I thought we put up this picture of me at that time. I thought you would dig the mustard tunic. But critics have written about it before, my use of color as being percussive, and that is very much in my mind when I'm composing a painting. To take vivid purple and put it right up against green, or to take orange and blue and butt them right up against each other in high intensity, creates a kind of percussive attack which can arrest the gaze of the viewer and also let them linger longer in that place because of the aggressiveness of that combination.